Nobody does it better than us.
Welcome to back, the man behind the mask, Julio. Thank you for joining us today. Could you just introduce yourself to everybody and let them know why you're here?
So I'm Julio, I'm CEO of Hallam, a digital agency based in Nottingham and now a national agency. And I'm here to try and add my contribution to your great cause and what Tough to Talk is doing, and hopefully to share some stories about myself that maybe will help others see the world a bit differently.
Amazing. So we're really pleased to have you on board.
I think everybody, I don't remember the quote where it came from, but I remember once somebody saying, everybody you meet on the street is fighting a similar battle to you, their own battle, right? And it gets me thinking. You may watch television or watch an interview with somebody you admire, or just a friend or somebody random on the street, and everybody has a thing that they're going through, a thing that they're doing, right? And I think a lot of people are very good at masking and pretending or showing a different view of themselves to the world. And I think it's really important to tackle that issue, because I think what we're actually doing is conforming to an expectation, actually, that when it's done for the wrong reasons, I think it can cause really quite a lot of harm. And so I think the mission is, I think it's okay to be yourself and to just show your true self to the world. I think it's necessary, and especially when you're not doing well, it's essential, I think.
That's excellent. And I'm just going to add an extra question here, but do you think there's a difference between the masks that men wear and women wear, generally?
They are different, for sure, but they're equally difficult, in my opinion. I think women are often expected to serve a role, and I think society has conditioned women to behave in a certain way. For example, a male leader being dynamic and forceful might be seen as decisive or dynamic, and a woman may be seen as bossy, or, I think those stigmas are bad. But on the flip side, it's equally harmful, in my opinion, that a man is expected to suck it up and, keep your chin up and whatever, and be strong through something that what they really need is help. And I think an expectation of strength when you don't have it is as bad as maybe somebody being, accused of being bossy or being whatever it might be. So I think these sort of social masks are quite a difficult thing, and a lot of people have masks for different reasons, whether it be neurodiversity, whether it be trauma, whether it be something else, right? And I think it contributes to a lot of problems.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think we talk about them enough. I mean, both sexes have identity factors that really affect them, and I think.
But they are different.
They are different, and neither one of them is spoken about enough. So how would you describe the mask that you typically present to the world?
I think as in my current position as the leader of a company, you need to be a mix of things, right? You need to be composed. You need to be calm. You need to be decisive. You need to show up and have a plan. You need to be, you need to keep certain opinions to yourself. You need to be very vocal about other things, and there are expectations that you have to conform to. But I think, for example, talking about the subject of Tough to Talk and what it centers on, if you have a person in my position who is going through a genuinely difficult time with mental health or whatever, not many people in these sort of roles will wave a flag and say, I need to tap out. I'm really not doing well. It just doesn't happen.
No.
Because there's an expectation that actually if you crack, then everybody else loses faith. I was talking to somebody yesterday who is somebody I admire very much, who is a very well-known, in the business community, very well-known business consultant, works with a lot of very high-powered people. And they said to me that they had been diagnosed with a neurodiversity. And they asked me this, they said, should I tell people about this? And I said, 100%, you definitely should. I think it's great. And then they said to me, wouldn't they just lose faith in me if I did, right?
Yeah.
And I said, why? Well, because I'm expected to be, you know, like on top of everything, have the best memory, and actually, you know, I thought, you know, it's true. Like a lot of people would go, well, you're obviously damaged. You obviously can't advise me anymore. But the reality is, this person is masking, and this person is being somebody else, and they've been somebody else for 40 whatever years, and they've never been their true, real, actual inner self ever, because they're expected to be something else, right?
No, absolutely. And if he had been himself that whole time, he still would have achieved everything that he's achieved. Right?
Probably, yeah, probably. I mean, it's the same with me, you know, like I was diagnosed with ADHD at aged 40 something, and then when it happened, and I was like, wow, like you sort of rewind your whole life, and you're like, okay, that makes sense, and you begin to, everything just begins to click, like a puzzle has been insta-solved by pushing a button, you know, and suddenly you can see the whole picture, and you're like, oh my God, like, that explains all these things, right? And I often say that when people are masking, when people are showing the mask, what they're actually doing is being the person that they were expected to be when they were a child. And somebody said, you know, if you just paid attention, if you just concentrated, if you just listened, I think you'd do very well, you know? Yeah. And then you'd learn to, like, maybe I should be more like that, but that's not who you are.
No, I get that, and it's funny you should say that about somebody you know, because I was talking to a CEO who had to have 3 months off to deal with their mental health. They had a mental health problem, they had 3 months off, but when they came back to the business, they didn't tell anybody what they'd gone through. They just said, I'd just been researching, doing some stuff for the business, taking it forwards. And when I said to them, well, why didn't you tell your business? Because then people coming up behind you would go, wow, I could still be the CEO and then have these problems, and I won't lose out. I won't lose my job. I won't lose these things. You know, I'll be taken care of, and that would have been really inspiring.
But it's very difficult, I think, if you're in that position, to be the person who stands up and goes, you know, this is what's going on, because some people will think less of you. It will happen.
Yeah.
So it takes a lot of bravery to actually be vulnerable in that way. It's very difficult to do, which, regardless of your gender, your position, your role, it doesn't really matter.
I agree, and we're dealing with that a lot. I mean, that's the whole point of Tough to Talk, right? Is to break the silence
exactly
around being able to talk about these really vulnerable issues, you know?
Yeah.
And we talk to a lot of men who have their perceptions of what other people think, society, the people around them, versus the reality of what actually happens. And when they break the silence and speak for the first time, the reality is often much better than their initial perception.
Of course it is.
Yeah. So can you share some of the significant achievements, some of your significant achievements, and how you've navigated this journey to success?
I don't know. I mean, from a very young age, I had a thing that was burned into my psyche, which was you've got to do something worth doing. Like, you can't just be a company man forever. You can't just grind away in a job and just do that job until you're really, I don't know why, but it was the motivation was like, you've got to do something worth doing, right? So starting a business and building it from nothing, literally from zero, has been incredibly difficult, but it's something that I don't have any regrets at all getting into doing, right? But the general direction for me has always been, do what you think you want. It's what I was talking to you earlier about the infinite game, right?
Yeah.
It's like, what are your principles? And generally go in that direction, and you'll find your way.
So let's talk a little bit about the man behind the mask. So could you tell me a little bit about the man behind the mask, and what vulnerabilities do you hide from the world?
Well, so I was diagnosed with ADHD only 2 or 3 years ago, so very, very late in life. I'm a very old man. 45 now. So yeah, diagnosed very late. So I think vulnerabilities, I mean, you know, one of the things that is probably atypical for somebody in my role is, how can you be the CEO of a company and have damaged memory or damaged ability, you know, like the perception of somebody with ADHD is they can't concentrate on anything, right? So vulnerabilities, I'm not very good with detail. I would struggle with things like financial reporting, you know, very long documents, that kind of thing. So those kind of vulnerabilities exist, you know, and also because of ADHD, I also didn't really excel academically, so I didn't have didn't study as deeply or as far as a lot of people would have done. So these are all sort of like, I guess, vulnerabilities in terms of relative to my job, to my position, right? That I think a lot of people would feel uncomfortable speaking about, especially when you talk about people in roles like mine. And like I was saying before, you know, I've been to those conferences and those groups where you've got, you know, these sort of armies of CEOs, usually men, who are all these well-rounded, sort of perfect examples of leadership that can do everything, right? I'm definitely not one of those guys. I've been in boardrooms before as an advisor or as a non-exec, where I've watched CEOs like masterfully present and navigate financial data, and I think, am I supposed to be good at that? Because I'm not. And you kind of feel like a little bit like maybe an imposter or a bit like a fraud, but actually I think it's very important to recognize what you're good at and what you're exceptional at, and equally recognize what you're not good at and what you probably will never be good at, and build around that, you know, get people around you who can do those things.
Yeah. I think most of those CEOs in there who seem well-rounded were just well-practiced.
They're also incredibly, a lot of them are unbelievably uncreative, and they don't have that, they're not great communicators a lot of the time, so they also have their weaknesses, but they rehearse out of those weaknesses, and that can certainly be, yeah, it's a challenge, it's certainly a challenge.
Previously, how have you kept your vulnerabilities hidden? And you know, and I know now that you don't. So it'd be interesting to know what you do about it now.
I think there's a certain amount of it where you pretend you can do it, and you have a go at it, and then you offer an opinion, and but you're uncomfortable. You're out of your comfort zone, and you know you are. You know, so I think a lot of people, and I think this is the thing about this, the central point to this concept of masking, which isn't just in work but also in personal situations, is there are people who have deep social anxiety and they'll go to an event and they'll pretend to have fun, and they go home and they're exhausted and they want to sleep for 3 days. That's the same thing. You're just pretending to be something you're not, and that is, you know, in a professional setting, it's I think it's important to own it and be able to say, I'm not good at that. I haven't read the report fully because I really struggle with the depth of information and the amount of detail. Can you explain it to me?
Yeah.
And I think it's good to do that. And likewise, in a I guess more in a private setting or in a personal relationship, I think it's equally important to own things. You know, I'm not feeling great. I'm not going to come out tonight. Oh, come on, man, let's go. It's like, I'm not. I'll actually, what needs to happen is your friends need to say, oh, that's cool, man. No worries. Do you want to go have a pizza instead? Like just me and you? Like that is what people need in those situations.
Yeah, I think that's super important. As if your friend normally comes out and they don't, and they say no, not tonight. Find out why.
Or maybe say, do you want to go to something else? Should we go fishing? Should we go? I'll tell you what. Why don't we just play FIFA all night?
Yeah.
Something else, you know, like something's going on. Like you need to be there for that.
Absolutely. Would you say that your perceived weaknesses have served as strengths?
I think I think your weaknesses not necessarily serve as strengths directly, but they allow you to focus on your strengths. I think that's, maybe I would say that's a better way of saying it. I think if you, for example, are somebody who has a really, really strong ability to conceptualize or to be creative or to look at data or to analyze information, perhaps owning your weaknesses means you don't spend your time doing things you're not good at, and you spend your time doing things you are good at, which means, you know, maybe you don't want me looking at you and analyzing your financials. You really don't. But maybe you do want me thinking, in my case, conceptually or creatively, and trying to come up with a way forward or simplify a really big problem into something clear. But if I spent my time doing the things I'm not good at, I wouldn't be as effective at the things that I have strengths in, right?
Yeah. So understanding your vulnerabilities means that you can focus on your strengths and then have a better outcome personally and professionally.
So I think understand your vulnerabilities and talk about them means that you can focus on what you're actually great at.
So what advice would you give men who might be hiding behind similar, masks?
I think what, you're doing it because you are conforming to an expectation of toughness, and toughness, I think, is seen as a sort of like general armor shield that covers everything, right? And I think being comfortable with that, not being part of that and not being like that, I think is quite an important thing.
Yeah. So kind of your toughness needs to be to own your vulnerabilities, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think owning your vulnerabilities and being vocal about them and speaking about them, and like I said, I was saying to you earlier, I mean, one of the things that I chose to do when I was diagnosed with ADHD was to announce it to the whole company in an all-hands meeting and explain it to everybody and say, look, this is who I am, this is what I'm not good at, this is what I am good at, this is how you can work with me, this is how you should maybe collaborate with me. And I think, one, you set some boundaries, which I think is quite important.
Yeah.
And the other one, I think, is you really double down on your strengths, and I think where I'm now in a position where people will call on me for things that they know I can do, but sometimes things that no one else can do, but certainly things that they know I can do well.
Yeah.
And they won't call on me to analyze financial information or to look at analytics or whatever, because it's just not my thing. I'm just not good at that.
So by announcing it to the business, you're basically saying, if to get the best out of me,
yes,
understand this.
But more importantly, normalize the fact that it's okay to do that. Normalize that it's okay to announce that you're not perfect, that you're flawed, as some people might see, right?
Yeah, and inspiring for all the other predominantly men probably who are struggling with demonstrating vulnerability because of a fear of what will other people think of me? Will I still be successful? So that's amazing.
It's super important that we normalize the communicating about those things, and we normalize talking about them. And I think that's the whole point of it, is talk about it and be completely open to that. And I'm seeing more and more people come out and explain their own situation, or their own worldview, and how they see things, and their own weaknesses and vulnerabilities and things they're worried about. And I think that's a good thing. I think especially with men, it's rare for that to happen, and a lot of the time historically it's never happened.
Yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts on the issues of male suicide.
I think the disproportionate, there's a real disproportion between the amount of harm that it causes and the amount of people that are affected by it and the amount we talk about this. I think it's really quite remarkable, the amount of, because when somebody goes through this, it's not just the person who has gone through it and whatever may happen to that person, but all the other people that are affected by that, and the guilt and the trauma that people have to live with sometimes forever because of it, right? And I think the amount of time that is spent talking about this and the amount of time that is spent discussing it is completely disproportionate with the impact that it has on people's lives. And I think all of us know a story of somebody who has gone through that journey, and all of us certainly know people who are in the middle of that and we don't even know it's happening. So for me, I think what's really, really important is to normalize and to remove the barriers to talking about these things and communicating about these things. But also, more importantly, is to be able to actually zoom in on the fact that there are, for every person who's going through that time, there are 10,000 opportunities that you could take to just intervene, just to offer a helping hand, to offer go for a chat, go for a coffee, go for a beer, ask a question, say something, just do something. And I think a lot of the time that is something that never happens because of that expectation of toughness or expectation of perfection, or somebody going, how are you doing? Oh, I'm fine. Oh, okay, cool, me too. And neither of them are fine.
Yeah.
And maybe the awkwardness perhaps, or the embarrassment of somebody saying, how are you doing? And they're like, actually I'm not okay at all. And the other person's like, I didn't mean how are you? It's just something I say, like,
yeah.
Maybe the question is actually how are you, rather than, maybe we should ban how are you, unless you actually you want the real answer,
Yeah, how are you's become like a greeting.
It's not a question.
No.
A lot of the time it's not a question. How are you is not a question. How are you is an expression of hello. Like, I want to say to you that I appreciate you, but it's not a question.
No. I loved what you said about that the not talking about suicide and crises that lead to thoughts of suicide is disproportionately small compared to the amount of people who are actually going through all this trouble. We Tough to Talk, we talk about breaking the silence all the time, and we have this image of an iceberg with, I think a lot of people see this tip at the top, mass underneath, and we talk about the silence before. So if suicide is the tip of the iceberg, then you've got the silence beforehand, no one's talking about it. Then you have suicide, and then there's silence afterwards because of stigma and guilt and regret. No one's talking about it afterwards. But underneath, the bulk of that iceberg is all of those factors that have led a person to believe that suicide is their best option. Biological factors, identity factors, current life events, all of those things in there, where we want to break the silence for people to be talking about that space before they get to the tip of the iceberg of suicide. So what is it that you're doing as Julio and Hallam, that you're doing to be able to tackle that greater part of the iceberg?
I think I think you're right. I think it's breaking the silence, and I think it's not necessarily directly encouraging or directly asking people to talk about suicide, because I think that's a very difficult thing to do. I think it's more about ensuring that, like I said to you before, that 10,000 opportunities before that even becomes a thought, or a serious option. Those are the things you need to encourage. Those thousands of opportunities. Maybe maybe you're not alone. Maybe maybe there's other people here who are going through the same thing as you, and maybe one of the things that I feel very strongly about, and one of the reasons why I'm starting to speak about my own background, which I've never really spoken about before, and in fact this is the first time I've ever spoken in public about my diagnosis. I've never done that before, because the reality is, like, if I can do it, you can do it. And a lot of the time I think these feelings and this friction is a result of a disconnect between the person you are to the outside world and the person who you really want to be. And I think the way to break that is to encourage people to be real and open and honest about who they actually truly are.
Yeah. Well, you have, we spoke before the filming about your setting expectations. As a leader, as a man, you've had the societal expectations of being stoic and strong. Put on you, but you're making a stand now by saying, well, actually, I'm setting a new expectation. The expectation is that you're not silent, that we do talk.
Exactly. It's that you do talk, but you also lean and own your weaknesses, and I think you should be encouraged to do so, and you should be encouraged to support other people's strengths and encourage them to speak. But I think you're right. I think I think it's talking about it and not showing up as a kind of like, oh, it'll be fine, or how are you? Oh, I'm fine. But you're not fine at all. Like, you're not, right? So I think it's for example, speaking about neurodiversity is incredibly important, because there's a lot of people who are caged by something they can't control, that stops them from performing at their best. And if somebody would just understand how they actually operate at their best, they would actually reach their best.
Yeah.
I remember speaking a couple of years ago to a guy who was working at another agency, and he had been diagnosed with ADHD, and he hadn't told anybody, including his boss. And he was asking me for my advice. And I spoke to his line manager separately in a one-to-one, and I said, look, if this person has ADHD, my guess is that these are the things that they're exceptional at. And I said, give him a go. Give him this huge problem like that no one else could solve, this massive, epic, huge thing, and see what comes out of the other end. And he did that, and the guy solved it. He just came up with something amazing, right? But because you align two things, you aligned what are they good at, and what are they not good at. You then got the person working on the right things, which then meant that that person was therefore happy, and they completely changed their productivity, their engagement levels, what people thought of them. And actually, when you actually really pull that thread far enough, what actually was missing was talking about it.
Yeah.
We didn't fix it. He wasn't un-ADHD'd.
No.
Like, none of those things, nothing changed. The only thing that changed is we talked about it.
It sounds perfect. He broke the silence, found a solution, and then everybody won.
And why wouldn't you do that? Like, you know.
And it was a great question. Why wouldn't you do that? I mean, I think it boils down to, I guess, if you're going through something yourself, you have a fear, maybe you're being judged, the perception of what you think other people will do.
When you walked into this office this morning, if you had walked in dragging your leg, I said, oh my God, Steve, what's happened? And you said, I just got hit by a bus. And I'd be like, oh my God, that's terrible. Let me take you to the hospital. Mm. That's a completely normal reaction to somebody getting hit by a bus.
Yeah.
Why do you not have the same level of conversation when somebody walks into an office and they're just really not well mentally? Why is that different? Is it because you don't have a physical bone destruction?
Yeah.
Like, that's, if you think about it, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, you are right.
So why is getting hit by a bus acceptable to talk about, but maybe having a trauma or having something else, that is not okay? Why?
You're right. If I broke my leg, you'd want to sign my cast, but if I'm off with a mental health problem...
No, don't talk about it. No, I don't want to hear about it, Steve. That's your problem, mate.
Yeah, they're the silences we need to break.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the thing, if you actually... I remember a story a few years ago of like a professional footballer who was, I can't remember his name, otherwise I would say it, but he was diagnosed with depression, and he was off from football for months with depression. But the injury at the time, I think it was in the 2000s, that was declared to the media was something else. Like a sprain or a ACL, it wasn't, it was depression. Yeah. They didn't talk about it. Nobody knew that this person had been diagnosed with depression because it would have perceived to be an unacceptable reason to be injured.
Yeah.
And also the bullying and the abuse that they would have received and the stands and so on, right? But isn't that funny? Like, if you get taken out and your leg's broken by Roy Keane, that's okay. You'll be alright, mate. Like, but if you are suffering from depression, that's not okay.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
It makes no sense to me.
Well, it's really good that we've got, more leaders who are now stepping up, talking about their own vulnerabilities and setting expectations that that's not going to happen here. We just need it to happen in more spaces.
Yes, but I think that it would, one person that I very much respect is Richard Branson, because Richard Branson is somebody who has openly spoken about being ADHD, and openly spoken about the things that they're not good at, that he's not good at, the things that he is good at, and not being ashamed of being a guy who doesn't understand certain things because it's just he just can't do it, And I think that normalizing that level of transparency and conversation, I think, is super, super important at all levels. Like that, a level like that, or a little company like ours, I think it's really, really important. And I think if there's one thing that I would hope that this interview does, is it changes one person's mind to just talk about what they're going through, or how they see the world, or the things that they feel are holding them back from being reaching their potential or whatever it might be, you know. And I think that's what it's about. Like I said to you before, is just talk about it, you know. Why is your leg hanging off? I got hit by a bus. Great, we talked about it. There is an equivalent conversation for other things that normally, for some reason, are not okay to talk about. And they should be. They are okay to talk about. You should talk about them.
Definitely. Okay, so I've got just two things for you now as we wrap up. One is, you know, how can people who are watching this help spread the word? And do you have any final thoughts for people who are watching?
I think spreading the word there's two things. I mean, first of all, I think amplifying the message of organizations like Tough to Talk and others is very, very important, because there are not that many organized systems or organized groups that are trying to do this in this way. Like this, it doesn't happen often, right? I think that's important, but I think also it's just set the example for your colleagues and your peers and your friends. Is be the one that steps up and says, you know what, this is what's going on with me, or I went through that once, and just own it and lean into your vulnerabilities, and don't be ashamed of it. Don't be ashamed of it any more than you would be if you got hit by a bus.
Yeah,
that's not your fault.
I like that. Lean into your vulnerabilities, and so what advice would you give to the people who hear people leaning into their vulnerabilities?
I think you absolutely should go out of your way to welcome it and to engage with it, and to not see it as a bad thing. And maybe share your own story back. I mean, and kind of like normalize the conversation. You know, you probably, if you truly tapped into the reality, the truth of most people that you come across on the street, everybody has a story like that. Either somebody they know, or they themselves, or somebody has a story like that, or they lost somebody and they feel like I could have done more. If there was just that one more thing I could have done at the time, that would have changed that outcome. That, you know, most people have a story like that, and they don't talk about it. And I think you know, if I would just leave with one thought, I think if you're in a position of leadership, however small that organization might be, you are setting an example for people every single day. And I feel like part of what I have been able to do, and my colleagues have been able to do at Hallam, is to normalize conversation, whether it's mental health, whether it's somebody going through a miscarriage, which happened at Hallam, and that person shared their story and spoke about it with everybody and set the tone and set a bar so high for what vulnerability and strength is, right? I think as leaders, I believe you have a responsibility to be a role model when it comes to setting that standard of openness and
be the change that you want to see.
Yeah, for sure. And I think showing up, you know, this sort of like, and especially in Britain, is a very, in my opinion, is a problem, which is this stiff upper lip, just make do, don't grumble kind of thing. Like, I think we have a real responsibility to reverse that, which I think is a harmful, in my opinion, it's a harmful attitude, because it creates deeply buried traumas and deeply buried problems that later surface in a much worse way. I think a lot of people who go through trauma, who deal with trauma as it happens or immediately after it happens, the silence after the event that you mentioned, is how you stop things from becoming 100 times worse in later life. And a lot of the time, I think I remember from one of your talks about how you explained that a lot of the time men who attempt suicide or decide to commit suicide actually have done it because of something that happened a long time ago, that it's just built up and built up, and they've never told anybody about, or they've never really addressed it or never really spoken about it. So I think encouraging people to just let go and talk about it, but it starts with you. You have to do it. You have to be the guy that stands up and says, this happened to me when I was a kid, or I went through this, or growing up, these are things that really held me back from succeeding. I think you can set the example, And one of the things that I feel very strongly about, and one of the things that I'm now starting to talk about more, because I want to be part of that change, is to leave people with a message that if I can do it, you can do it. Because I wasn't meant to be the CEO of a company, because I didn't fit the standard. I didn't fit the mold. I didn't. And there's been many times in my career, and it still happens now, where there are people who think that I should have supervision, or I should have somebody who is more normal to make sure that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's a perception, that's because the stigma is that people who are not completely, perfectly reserved and perfectly composed and perfectly masked are not suitable for a job.
Makes total sense, and I could talk to you for hours about this, so I really appreciate you giving me your time today. It's brilliant having you and Hallam Digital as part of the Tough to Talk family. I think you're setting a great example for everybody, so thank you for talking to us today.
We're proud to be part of it.
Awesome, thank you.
Nobody does it better than us.